In 1997, a small publisher in Vancouver printed 3,000 copies of a book by an author nobody had heard of. 3,000 is not a print run that means anything. It is the number you print when you're not sure the book will sell at all. There was no marketing budget, no tour, no reviews in serious papers, because serious papers had no reason to review it. The author was a soft-spoken German man in his late 40s who had spent the previous years living in a way that would be generous to call unconventional. He had no academic post, no institution behind him, no organization, and no track record. He delivered copies to bookshops himself. And then something happened that publishers spend entire careers trying to engineer and almost never manage. People who read it gave it to other people. Those people gave it to other people. It moved through Vancouver, then across Canada, then down into the United States, entirely by word of mouth, with nothing pushing it. By 1999, a larger American publisher had picked it up. And in 2000, Oprah Winfrey read it and started recommending it in her magazine. That was the moment the ceiling came off. The Power of Now went to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It has since sold many millions of copies in more than 30 languages. 8 years later, Oprah and its author ran a 10-week online series together for his follow-up book, and millions of people signed up to watch two people discuss consciousness on the internet in 2008, which was not a thing that happened. So what is actually in it? Today we're going through the whole book, every major idea, the practices, where they came from, and the parts you should be careful with. Because there are parts you should be careful with, and most breakdowns of this book won't tell you that. Here's the shape of the next half hour. Who Eckhart Tolle actually is, and the strange night that produced this book. Then the core ideas in order. Why he says you are not the voice in your head, what he means by the watcher, the difference between clock time and psychological time, the pain body, why the ego needs problems, and what surrender actually means, because it does not mean what it sounds like. Then the practices, which are simpler than the philosophy around them. And at the end, the honest part, where this book overlaps with things that have real evidence behind them, where it's making claims it can't support, and the one area where taking it literally could genuinely hurt you. Eckhart Tolle was born Ulrich Tolle in Germany in 1948, 3 years after the war, in a country still in pieces. He moved to Spain as a teenager, then to England, and eventually to Cambridge as a research scholar. And by his account, he was profoundly unhappy for most of that time. Not disappointed, unhappy, in a deep and continuous way that made ordinary living difficult. He describes a night when he was 29 as the turning point. Lying awake in the early hours, in a state of despair, he says, had become unbearable. A thought surfaced, that he could not live with himself any longer. And then, he says, he stopped, because the sentence didn't make sense. I cannot live with myself. That's two of something. If there's an I and a self, which one is the actual person, and which one has been generating all of this misery? Whatever happened next, Tolle describes it as a kind of dissolution. Something he had taken to be himself came apart. He says he woke the next morning to a room that appeared extraordinary, as though he were seeing everything for the first time, and that a deep stillness had replaced the voice that had tormented him. He then spent about 2 years, by his own account, sitting on park benches. No job, no plan, no possessions to speak of, in a state he describes as almost uninterrupted peace. People occasionally asked if he was all right. He eventually began speaking with a few people, then small groups. Later he took the name Eckhart, after the medieval German mystic Meister Eckhart. The book came out of those conversations, which is why it's written in a question-and-answer format, rather than as chapters. It's a transcript of a teaching, not an argument. I'll come back to that night at the end of the video, because there is more than one way to read it, and the alternative reading is not disrespectful, it's just different. Idea 1. You are not the voice in your head. Start with something you can check right now. There is a voice narrating your life. It comments, judges, rehearses arguments you'll never have, replays conversations from years ago, and predicts disasters that mostly don't arrive. It is running almost continuously, and it has been since you were a child. Most people have never noticed it, for the same reason a fish hasn't noticed water. It isn't experienced as a voice you're listening to. It's experienced as you. Tolle's central claim is that this is a case of mistaken identity, that you have confused an instrument for its owner. Thought is a tool, extraordinarily useful, capable of building bridges and vaccines and this video. But you did not choose most of the thoughts you had today, and you cannot reliably stop them, which is a strange thing to say about something that's supposed to be you. Try it. Decide to think nothing at all for 60 seconds. Whatever wins that contest is not under your control, and the thing that noticed it wasn't under your control is not the same thing as the thoughts. Tolle uses the word ego for the identity built out of this compulsive thinking, the accumulated story of who you are, made of memories, roles, grievances, ambitions, and opinions, which needs to keep being narrated to stay solid. And because it's made of thought, silence threatens it. Which is why, when nothing is happening, the mind will manufacture something, a worry, a resentment, a plan, a scroll. This is where the more useful half of the argument lives. Once you can see the voice as a voice rather than as yourself, its authority drops. The thought, "I'm going to fail at this," is transformed by adding 4 words at the front. I noticed the thought, "I'm going to fail at this." Nothing about the content changed. Everything about the relationship did. And hold on to that move, because it's not only Tolle's. It reappears at the end of this video in a lab coat. Idea 2. The watcher. If you can observe the voice, then something is doing the observing, and that something cannot be the voice. Tolle calls this the watcher, or the observing presence. It's the part of you reading this sentence that is also aware that you're reading it. The practice he gives is deceptively simple. Rather than trying to stop thinking, which doesn't work and mostly generates a new layer of thinking about how badly you're doing at not thinking, you simply watch. Let a thought arise, notice it as an event, and don't follow it. Don't argue with it. Don't attach to it. Don't decide whether it's true. And what Tolle claims happens, and this is testable in a small way, which is unusual for this book, is that thought which is observed loses momentum. A worry you fight with grows. A worry you watch tends to lose its grip, because rumination requires participation. He describes a gap that opens between thoughts, small at first, a second, maybe less. And in that gap, he says you experience something that isn't the absence of thought so much as a presence underneath it. Awareness with nothing in it. He'll use several names for that: being, presence, stillness. This is where the book becomes hardest to evaluate, because he's now describing something that cannot be argued about, only reported. You can take that or leave it. The practice survives either way. Watching your thoughts instead of being dragged behind them is worth doing whether or not it reveals the ground of being. It's worth doing because rumination is miserable, and this reduces it. Idea 3. There are 2 kinds of time, and one of them is a trap. The obvious objection to a book called The Power of Now is that living in the present is impractical. You have to plan, learn from mistakes, book the flight. Tolle answers this with a distinction that is genuinely the most useful idea in the book. Clock time is practical. Set a goal, plan a route, take the lesson from a failure, schedule the appointment. It's time used as a tool, and then put down. Psychological time is what happens when you live there, replaying an old humiliation for the 400th time, rehearsing a conversation for a meeting that's a week away, waiting for the promotion, the move, the relationship, the moment when your life will finally begin. The difference is whether you're using time or inhabiting it. And his sharpest observation is about waiting. Waiting, he says, is a state of mind. It means you want the future and not the present. You're rejecting what you have in favor of what you don't. There's small waiting, standing in a queue with a sour expression, and there's large waiting, waiting for the degree, the house, the retirement. Both do the same thing. They discount the only time you actually have in favor of one that doesn't exist yet. And when the future arrives, it arrives as a present moment, which is the one thing you've spent years practicing not to value. So the person who waits for happiness does not get happier when the thing comes. They find a new thing to wait for. Now, the pushback, because this is where the book overreaches. There are situations where planning ahead isn't psychological time, it's survival. A parent budgeting to the end of the month, someone managing a chronic illness. Tolle's framing sometimes treats future focus as a spiritual failing rather than, occasionally, a necessity. The distinction between using time and living in it is excellent. The suggestion that a well-adjusted person barely thinks about the future is not. Idea 4. The pain body. This is the strangest concept in the book, and it's also the one readers most often say described something they'd noticed but had no name for. Tolle proposes that old emotional pain doesn't fully disappear. It accumulates from childhood, from losses, from everything unresolved, and forms something he describes as an energy field that lives in you, dormant much of the time, but capable of waking up. And when it wakes, he says, it wants feeding. It feeds on more pain, so it will steer you toward conflict, toward the argument you know you shouldn't start, toward the memory that will ruin your evening, toward the message you'll regret sending. And afterwards, you'll wonder why you did that, and you won't have a good answer. Now, there is no scientific entity called a pain body. It isn't measurable, and Tolle isn't claiming it is. Taken literally as a thing inside you, it's not something I can defend. Taken as a description of a pattern, it's uncomfortably accurate. Anyone who has watched someone reliably pick a fight when things are going well, or has done it themselves, recognizes the shape. Psychology has adjacent language, rumination, emotional reactivity, trauma responses, repetition compulsion, and none of it is as vivid or as memorable. Tolle's prescription is the same as everything else in the book. Don't fight it. Watch it. Recognize the moment the old feeling comes online. Name it as the pattern rather than as yourself, and don't hand it the microphone. His claim is that the pattern can't survive being observed because it runs on identification. The moment you can see it as separate from you, you stop being it. Idea 5. The ego needs a problem. Here's an observation that will annoy you if it lands. Notice how quickly, when one difficulty resolves, another arrives to occupy the space. Not because life produced it, because you found it. Tolle's argument is that an identity built from thought requires content, something to be against, worried about, working on, in conflict with. A person with no problems has no story, and a story is what the ego is made of, which is why some people are visibly less comfortable when things are going well. He separates situations from problems, and the distinction is worth keeping. A situation is something you either act on now or accept for now. The tire is flat. Change it, call someone, or wait. All three are actions in the present. A problem is a situation you carry around in your head, turning it over, when there is nothing to be done about it at this moment. It's the mind holding something it can't currently act on, which is the specific activity that produces most human suffering. He extends this to grievance and to being right. The ego strengthens itself through opposition, the enemy, the injustice, the person who wronged you. Being wronged is a very stable identity because it requires nothing from you and explains everything. And this connects to complaining, which he treats more seriously than most writers do. Complaining is not the same as stating a fact or making a request. Complaining is the act of resisting something while doing nothing about it, and it's the most reliable way to be unhappy on purpose while feeling justified. Idea 6. Surrender. This is the most misunderstood word in the book, and probably the most misused idea in modern spirituality, so let's be precise. Tolle does not mean give up. He does not mean tolerate mistreatment, or accept an unjust situation, or stop trying. He means stop arguing with what has already happened. The distinction is between the situation and your resistance to the situation. The traffic jam exists. The flight is canceled. The diagnosis is what it is. Those facts are not affected by your objection to them, but the objection is a second, separate source of suffering that you are generating on top of the first one. He offers 3 options for any circumstance you don't like. I think this is the most immediately usable idea in the book after clock time. Remove yourself from it. Leave the job, end the relationship, get out of the room. Change it. Act, speak, negotiate, fix. Accept it completely. Not resentfully, completely. As though you had chosen it. That's the whole list. And his point is that almost nobody picks one. Most people spend years in a fourth position that isn't on the list, staying in the situation, not changing it, and resenting it continuously. That fourth position is where most human misery is manufactured. Notice that 2 of the 3 options are actions. This is the answer to the criticism that presence is passivity. Tolle's actual claim is the opposite. He argues that action taken from acceptance is more effective than action taken from resistance, because resistance burns most of your energy on the objection rather than the work. I'd add a caution he doesn't emphasize enough. Accept it completely is the right advice for a canceled flight and the wrong advice for an abusive relationship or an exploitative employer. The list has 3 items, and the first one is leave. If someone ever uses this book to explain why you should accept something you could walk away from, they're using it backwards. Idea 7. What you actually do. The philosophy in this book is abstract. The practices are almost embarrassingly concrete, and they're the part worth taking away. Watch the thinker. Whenever you notice you've been lost in thought, that noticing is the practice, not a failure, the thing itself. You don't have to stop. Just observe, and don't follow. Feel the inner body. Close your eyes, and put attention into your hands. Not thinking about your hands, feeling them from the inside, then the arms, then the whole body. Tolle treats this as an anchor, because the body only exists in the present. It has no access to yesterday. Attention placed there cannot be simultaneously 3 years in the past. Use the senses as a door. Fully hear a sound, fully see one object. Perception without commentary, even for a few seconds. Watch the breath, not controlling it, following it. The oldest attention practice in existence, and he doesn't claim to have invented it. Do one thing at a time. Wash the dishes, to wash the dishes, rather than to have them washed. Any ordinary act done with full attention becomes the practice. And notice what's absent. There is no equipment, no schedule, no 30-day plan, nothing to buy. Whatever else this book is, it isn't a funnel. Idea 8. Relationships. Tolle argues that most romantic relationships alternate between 2 states rather than resting in one: intensity and hostility, cycling. And that the intensity is often mistaken for love when it's actually relief. His account is that people arrive at relationships incomplete and expecting the other person to fill the gap. That's a demand no human being can meet, so the relief phase always ends. And what follows is resentment, because in some part of the mind, a promise was made and then broken, though nobody actually made it. 2 pain bodies, he says, will find each other reliably and will feed each other reliably. His prescription is characteristically inconvenient. Stop asking the relationship to complete you, and it stops failing at a job it never could do. The other person becomes a person rather than a solution. And the practical version, which does not require any metaphysics, pay attention to your partner without simultaneously running commentary about them. Most of what we call listening is waiting with opinions. Now the honest part. There's more to say here than in the other books we've covered, and I'd rather you hear it from someone who took the book seriously. Start with the practices, because they hold up well. The core move, noticing thoughts as thoughts rather than as reality, is not unique to Tolle, and that's a point in its favor. It appears in Buddhist practice going back 2,500 years. It appears in modern clinical psychology as cognitive diffusion in acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's the mechanism inside mindfulness-based cognitive therapy which has real evidence behind it for reducing relapse in recurrent depression. Tolle didn't discover this. He packaged it, in plain language, without asking anyone to adopt a religion, and that packaging is genuinely why millions of people encountered it. Second, the metaphysics is not evidence, and the book blurs the line. Being, consciousness as the ground of reality, the pain body as an energy field, these are claims that cannot be tested. presented in the same tone of voice as the observations that can. A reader has no easy way to tell which sentences are practical instructions and which are cosmology. Third, and this is the one I want you to hear, Tolle has at times suggested a link between physical illness and unconsciousness or negative mental states, that presence can influence disease. Do not take that literally. There is no good evidence that consciousness practices cure physical illness, and the cost of believing it is not abstract. People have delayed real treatment on the strength of ideas like this one. Meditation can help you live with a condition. It does not treat the condition. If you take one thing from this section, take that. Fourth, the passivity risk has a name. It's called spiritual bypassing, using spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with practical, emotional, or structural problems. Presence can become a way of not addressing a bad situation while feeling enlightened about it. Tolle's own 3 options argue against this, but the book's tone doesn't always protect against it, and plenty of readers have found it. And finally, that night. Tolle's transformation at 29 is unverifiable. It's one man's account of his own inner life, which is the only kind of account that could exist. It's also worth knowing that clinicians reading the same description sometimes recognize features of depersonalization, or of a break followed by remission. That doesn't make him dishonest, and it doesn't make the book worthless. It means the same night has more than one available reading, and certainty in either direction isn't warranted. Take the practices, hold the metaphysics loosely, ignore anything about illness. Come back to those 3,000 copies. A book with no marketing, by an author with no platform, moved through the world, one person at a time, because readers kept handing it to other readers. That's not a marketing outcome. It's a signal that something in it met a need people had and couldn't name. I think the need is fairly simple. Most of us spend most of our lives somewhere other than where our body is. In an argument from last week, in a version of next year, in a conversation we're rehearsing and will never have. And the strange arithmetic of that is that the present moment is the only place anything has ever happened to you. Every experience you've had, without exception, occurred in a now, and it's the one place we reliably refuse to be. You don't have to accept a word of the philosophy to take that seriously. So here's my question for you. When were you last fully in one moment, not remembering it afterwards, actually inside it while it happened? And what were you doing? Put it in the comments. I suspect the answers are going to be very ordinary, and that's exactly why I want to read them. If this gave you something worth sitting with, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We break down one great book like this every week. The voice in your head is not you. You're the one who noticed it. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.